Yeah. Last year I spent 6 months participating in what I was told was a psychological experiment. I found an ad in an old local newspaper looking for imaginative people looking to make good money. And since it was a day only ad that week that I was remotely qualified for, I gave them a call and we arranged an interview. They told me that I would have to do is stay in a room alone with sensors attached to my head and reading my brain activity. And while they told me that was all I had to do, I was there. I would visualize a double of myself. They called my Tulpa. It seemed easy enough, and I agreed to do it as soon as they told me how much I would be paid. The next day I began. They brought me to a simple room and gave me a bed, then attached sensors to my head and hooked them into a little black box in the table beside me. He taught me to do the process of visualizing my double again and explained that if I got bored or restless, instead of moving around, I should visualize my double moving around or try to interact with him and so on. The idea was to keep him in the entire time I was in the room. I had trouble with it the first few days. It was more controlled than any sort of daydreaming I had ever done before. I imagined my double for a few minutes, then grew distracted, but by the fourth day, I managed to keep him present for the entire 6 hours. They told me I was doing very well. The second week, they gave me a different room with wall-mounted speakers. They told me that they wanted to see if I could still keep the Tulpa with me in this spite of distracting stimuli. The music was distorted, ugly, and unsettling, and it made the process of a little more difficult, but I managed nonetheless. Next week they played even more unsettling music with shrieks, feedback, loops that sound like it was an old school modern dialing up. The girl voices speaking from foreign language. I just laughed it off. I was a pro by then. After about a month, I started to get bored. To liven things up, I started interacting with my doppelganger. We'd have conversations or play rock, paper, scissors. I imagined him juggling or breakdancing or whatever caught my fancy. Asking the researchers if my foolishness would adversely affect the study, but they encouraged me, so we played and communicated. And that was fun for a while. And then it got a little strange. I was telling him about my first date one day, and he corrected me. He said my date was wearing a yellow top, and he told me it was a green top. I thought about it for a second and realized he was right. It creeped me out, and after my shift that day, I talked to the researchers about it. They said that using your thought form was to process your subconscious. They explained. You were on the same level that you were wrong, and you knew that you were, and you subconsciously corrected yourself. What had been creepy was something cool. I was talking to my subconscious. It took some practice, but I found that I could question my Tulpa and access all sorts of memories. I couldn't make it quote whole pages from books that I once read years before, or things that I was taught and immediately forgot in high school. It was awesome. That was around the time I started calling up my double outside the research center. Not often at first, but I was used to imagining him by now, and it almost seemed odd not to see him. So whenever I was bored, I visualized my double. Eventually I started doing it almost all the time. It was assuming, well, it was amusing to take him along like an invisible friend. I imagined him like he wasn't even there, or rather, when I was hanging out with my friends. or visiting my mom. I even brought him along on a date once. I didn't even speak aloud to him. I was able to carry out conversations with him, and no one was wiser. I knew that sounds strange, but it was fun. Not only was he walking repertory of everything I knew and everything I had forgotten, he also seemed more in touch with me than I thought at times. He had an uncanny grasp of everything in body language, and I didn't even realize I was picking up on. For example, I thought the date I brought him along on was going badly, but he pointed out how much he laughed a little too hard at my jokes, and then leaned towards as I spoke, and a bunch of other subtle clues I wasn't considerably picking up on. I listened, and let's just say that date went very well. By the time I'd been at the research center for 4 months, he was with my con- he was with me constantly. The researcher approached me one day after my shift and asked me if I had stopped visualizing him. I denied it, and they seemed pleased. I silently asked my double if he knew what promoted that, but he just shrugged it off. So did I. I withdraw a little from the world at that point. I had started having trouble with relating to people. It seemed to me like they were so confused and unsure of themselves, while I had manifestation of myself to confer with. I made socializing awkward. Nobody else seemed aware of the reasons behind their actions, why some things made them mad, or others made them laugh. They didn't know what moved them, but I did, or at least I could ask myself and get the answer. An answer confronted me one evening. He pounded at the door until I answered it. He came fuming and swearing up a storm. "You haven't answered when I called you. You're freaking weak, you jerk," he yelled. "What's your freaking problem?" I was about to apologize to him, and probably would have offered to hit the bars with him that night, but my Tulpa grew suddenly furious. "Hit him," it said, and before I knew what I was doing, I heard his nose break and fell to the floor and came up swinging, and we beat each other up and down the apartment. I was more furious than I had ever been, and I was not merciful, knocking him to the ground and gave him a savage kicks to his ribs, and when he fled, hunched over and sobbing. The police were a few minutes later, but I told them that he had been the instigator, and since he wasn't around to refute me, they let him off with a warning. My Tulpa was grinning the entire time. We spent the night crowing about my victory and sneering over how badly I'd beaten my friend. It wasn't until the next morning, when I checked out my black eye and lip in the mirror, that I remembered what had set me off. My double was one who grew furious, not me. I had been feeling guilty and a little ashamed, but he told me that it was okay to be furious with him. He was present, of course, and knew my thoughts. I don't need him anymore, and you don't either. You don't need anyone else, he told me, and I felt my skin crawl. I explained this to the researchers who employed me. They just laughed it off. "You can't be scared of something you're imagining," one told me. The double stood beside me and nodding his head, he smirked at me. I tried to take their words to heart, But over the next few days, I found myself growing more and more anxious around my Tulpa, and it seemed like he was changing. He looked taller and more menacing. His eyes twinkled with mischief, and I saw malice on his constant smile. No job was worth losing my mind over, I decided. If he was out of control, I put him down. I was so used to him at that point that visualizing him was an automatic process. So I started telling my Dan my Dan to not visualize him. It took a few days, but it started to work somewhat. I could get rid of him for hours at a time, but every time he came back, he seemed worse. His skin seemed ashen. His teeth were pointed. He hissed and growled and threatened and swore. The the distorted music I've been listening to for months seemed to accompany him everywhere, even when I was at home. I relaxed and slipped up, no longer concentrating on not seeing him, and there he'd be, and that howling noise with him. I still visited the research center and spent my 6 hours there. I needed the money, and I thought they weren't aware that I was not actively not visualizing my Tulpa. I was wrong. After my shift one day, about 5.5 months in, two impressively men grabbed me and restrained me, and someone in a lab coat jabbed a hypothermic needle in me. I woke up with my stupor back in the room, strapped into the bed, music blaring, with my doppelganger sitting right over me, cackling. It hardly looked human anymore. His features were twisted, his eyes were sunken in their sockets, and filmed over like corpses. He was much taller than me, and hunched over. His hands were twisted, and his fingernails were like talons. He was, in short, freaking terrifying. I tried to wheel him away, but I couldn't seem to concentrate. He giggled and tapped the IV in my arm. I thrashed in my restraints as best I could, but hardly move at all. Been pumping you full of the good crap, I think. How's the mind? All fuzzy? He leaned closer and closer as he spoke. I gagged. His breath smelled like swollen meat. I tried to focus, but I couldn't banish him. The next few weeks were terrible. Every so often, someone in the doctor would come in and inject me with something or force feed me a pill. They kept me dizzy and focused, and sometimes left me hallucinating or delusional. My thought form was still present, constantly mocking, or perhaps my delusions. I hallucinated with my mother was there, scolding me, and then he cut her throat and blood showered me. It was real that I could taste the blood. The doctor never spoke to me. I begged them, screamed, hurled anything I could, demanding answers. They never spoke to me. They may have talked to my Tulpa, my personal monster. I'm not sure, but I was so doped and confused that it may have been more delusion. But I remember them talking to him. I grew convinced he was the real one, and I was in thought form. He encouraged that line of thought was at times mocking me at others. Another thing that I prayed that was illusion. He could touch me. More than that, he could hurt me. He would poke and prod me at times. If he felt I wasn't paying enough attention to him, he once grabbed my neck and squeezed until I told him that I'd kill myself. Another time, he slashed my forearm with one of his talons. I still have a scar. Mostly I can convince myself that I injured myself and just hallucinated that he was responsible most days. Then one day, while I was telling my story about how I was going, got everyone I loved, starting with my sister, he paused. He looked the look across his face, and he reached and touched my head, like my mother used to do when I was feverish. He stayed until a long moment, and then smiled. All thoughts are creative, he told me, and he walked out the door. 3 hours later, I was given an injection and passed out. I woke on strange, shaking, and made my way to the door, and found it unlocked. I walked out into the empty hallway, and then ran. I stumbled more than once, but I made it down the stairs, and ran into the lot behind the building. There I collapsed, weakened like a child. I knew that I had to keep moving, but I couldn't manage it. I got home eventually. I don't remember how. I locked the door and shoved the dresser against it. Took a long shower and slept for a day and a half. No one came for me at the night, and nobody came the next day or the one after that. It was over. I spent a week locked up in that room, and it felt like a century. With I withdrawn with so many of my long beforehand that no one even known that I was missing. The police didn't find anything. The research center was empty when they searched it. The paper fell apart. The name I'd given them were all aliases. Even the money I'd received was apparently untraceable. I recovered so much as one can. I don't have the house much. I don't leave it. And I have panic attacks when I do. I cry a lot. I don't sleep much. And my nightmares are terrible. It's over, I tell myself. I survived. I used the concentration those jerks taught me to convince myself. It works sometimes. Not today, though. 3 days ago, I got a phone call from my mother, and it's been a tragedy. My sister's latest victim is on a spree of killings. The police say the predator mugs his victims, then guts them. The funeral was this afternoon. Another service, and it was wonderful, I suppose. It really scares me though, but I hope I can get over it. But I still don't know what I can do. I just wish I could leave everything behind. Not that it would do much good, but I know it wouldn't. What could I do? What could I do about all the stuff that happened to me? I don't know, but I hope I can just put it all behind me. Nothing happened, but it was a little distracting though. All I could do was hear music coming from somewhere distant. Discord's unsettling stuff, but it sounds like feedbacks and shrieking and the modern dialing up. I still hear it a little louder now.